The African Deep Dive podcast is brought to you by the African Technology Policy Studies Network. This podcast explores how science, technology, and innovation can drive sustainable development and global inclusion in Africa.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and give you the essential insights from loads of research. Today we're doing a really critical deep dive, looking squarely at Africa's knowledge systems. And we're asking a pretty blunt question. Why isn't higher education in Africa really driving sustainable development the way it could be? Or maybe the way it should be? Our sources point to a deep structural disconnect. We're going to explore this and the proposed path forward, mainly through the lens of HESDA, that's Higher Education for Sustainable Development in Africa. Now, just to be clear, when we talk about Education for Sustainable Development, ESD, we mean education that empowers people, gives them the tools to build a future that lasts. One that balances environmental health, economic stability, and importantly, social justice.
Exactly. And that idea of sustainable really has to connect back to the Brundtland Commission's definition. It's the classic one. Development is sustainable when it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. It's fundamentally about responsibility across generations.
Right. And the core argument, the really provocative thesis in the research we looked at is this: higher education in Africa only helps achieve sustainable development if it actually, tangibly, meets the social, economic, and biophysical needs of Africans, both now and in the future.
And the immediate conclusion drawn from the analysis is pretty stark. The current system, it just can't do that job effectively. The way knowledge is set up right now, how it's taught, how it's structured, how it's rewarded, it's all based on isolated disciplines. That structure inherently blocks the kind of systems thinking, the collaboration that you absolutely need for tackling complex sustainability issues.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. If the system itself is the problem, where did these weaknesses, these structural issues, actually start?
Well, it's a systemic weakness, and it's deeply rooted in history. You have to look back. The basic architecture of higher education across much of Africa was largely modeled on the systems of the colonial powers. The British, French, Belgian models. This wasn't accidental. It created these rigid, often hierarchical bureaucracies and knowledge systems that were, frankly, designed more to replicate the style and focus of universities back in Europe, not necessarily to solve local African problems. It's an institutional legacy.
That blueprint sounds like it laid the groundwork for the infamous academic silos we still hear so much about today.
Precisely. Universities are typically organized into faculties, departments, often with what the sources call rigid boundaries. This naturally creates these academic tribes where experts stay in their lanes. It strongly discourages working across disciplines, that transdisciplinary approach.
So if you need, say, an agricultural solution.
Right. If you want something truly sustainable for agriculture, you probably need soil scientists talking to climate experts, talking to economists, definitely talking to local farmers who have generations of knowledge. But if they're all stuck in separate departments with separate goals and languages, that integrated solution, it often just doesn't happen.
And language itself becomes another barrier, doesn't it? Blocking people out.
Oh, absolutely. A huge amount of scientific discussion, research output, it stays in the colonial languages, English, French, Portuguese. This immediately creates a barrier. It excludes large parts of civil society, local communities, even many policymakers from really engaging with or using the research.
There was that striking example in the readings.
Yes, the one about students learning about local food security. They might be taught about important indigenous crops, but only using their formal botanical or Latin names. Names that mean absolutely nothing to the farmers or communities outside that university classroom. So the knowledge is effectively trapped, isn't it? It can't easily be applied or integrated back into the community it's supposed to benefit.
The impact you can measure from all this. It's quite sobering when you look at the numbers.
It really is. University enrollment rates in sub-Saharan Africa, on average, are hovering around just 5%.
5%?
Yeah. Compare that to over 60% in many developed economies. It's a massive gap.
And it's not just about getting more kids into primary school, is it? The problem seems higher up the chain.
That's a critical point. Simply boosting basic education, while vital, hasn't automatically translated into the kind of economic growth you might expect. We see this in countries like Togo or Madagascar. They achieved high primary enrollment, which is great, but it didn't lead to a proportional leap in national income. It really highlights that higher education, the place where advanced, locally relevant knowledge is created and applied, that seems to be a crucial bottleneck for development.
Okay, so we have the historical roots, the siloed structure, the language barriers. What about the incentives, the drivers within the system itself? Let's get into the publish-or-perish culture.
Ah, yes. Publish or perish. This is where the problem of, let's call it external validation, really comes into focus. The way things are currently set up, promotions, research funding, things like the research assessment exercises or RAE, they heavily reward publishing articles in specific academic journals. Often, single-authored papers in prestigious international journals get the most points, much more than, say, collaborative work aimed at solving a specific local problem.
And those RAE systems, the criteria they use, are often imported too.
Very often, yes. They rely heavily on foreign criteria. And think about it. The most influential international journals are mostly based in Europe or North America. Naturally, their scope, their priorities, are often geared towards the research and development agendas of the global north.
Which means research focused purely on African development challenges might struggle to get published there.
It's explicitly mentioned in the sources that kind of research is seldom published in those top-tier venues simply because it doesn't align with their primary focus. And this creates a really damaging feedback loop. Because the outputs are geared towards external validation, the system struggles to show tangible contributions to national income growth or local problem solving.
So governments then have less incentive to invest.
Exactly. If universities aren't seen as directly driving economic progress or solving pressing local issues, governments facing urgent challenges like poverty or water insecurity will, quite logically, prioritize those immediate needs. This limits the investment flowing back into higher education, which further hampers its ability to become more relevant. It's a vicious cycle. What's fascinating here is the system isn't broken, in a way. It's actually perfectly designed to achieve the outcomes it currently produces, which are often irrelevant to local sustainable development. It really begs the question, if the metric you're using to measure success is fundamentally misaligned with the local context and needs, how can the output ever be right for those needs?
That's a powerful point. If the whole system is geared incorrectly, tinkering isn't enough. Which leads us to the proposed solution in the research, and it's pretty radical. They call for a complete re-engineering, essentially a socialization of our knowledge systems. What does that mean in practice?
It means fundamentally embedding science, research, and higher education within African society, making it directly relevant to, and driven by, the continent's economic and environmental sustainability goals. It's about making knowledge work for society.
And how do they propose achieving such a massive shift?
The paper outlines 6 key pillars of reform. They really emphasize that these need to happen together. It's not a pick-and-mix menu. The first 3 tackle those core intellectual and structural flaws we discussed. First, pedagogical reforms. This means moving away from teaching in isolated disciplines towards genuine transdisciplinary science, breaking down those walls in the classroom and in research. Second, structural reforms. Shifting the model from a top-down, linear transfer of knowledge like, University Discovers, tells others, to creating collaborative platforms for what they call responsible innovation. Think new kinds of centers of excellence designed for collaboration.
Responsible innovation. We'll come back to that. What's the third?
Third, and maybe the hardest, mindset reforms. This is about actively abandoning that ingrained silo thinking and mandating a systems thinking approach across the board, seeing the interconnectedness of problems.
That mindset shift sounds enormous. You're asking potentially thousands of academics trained for decades in disciplinary thinking to completely change their approach. Is that realistic?
It's acknowledged as incredibly difficult, but the argument seems to be that the structural and governance changes have to drive the cultural change. You can't just hope minds will change on their own. Which brings us to the next 3 pillars, focusing more on the rules, governance, and the enabling environment.
Right, the enforcement mechanisms.
Exactly. So, fourth, governance reforms. Moving away from traditional, rigid knowledge hierarchies towards more participatory governance. This includes bringing wider society into the research process, that socialization idea again. Fifth, incentive structures reforms. This is the direct attack on publish or perish, replacing it with a much more inclusive, impact-based system for rewards and promotions, judging value differently.
And finally,
And sixth, policy environment reform. This is about the government's role in creating the framework for all this to actually work. Things like supportive legislation, maybe specific student loan programs geared towards innovation, strategic investments, and the right kind of infrastructure.
Okay. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's dig into what this new paradigm actually looks like. That first pillar, transdisciplinarity. How is it different from just, say, multiple disciplines working near each other?
It's fundamentally different. Multidisciplinarity might be different experts looking at the same problem from their own angles. Interdisciplinarity might involve integrating their approaches somewhat, but transdisciplinarity, as defined here, is about joint problem solving. It explicitly integrates science, technology, and society. It values extra scientific experience and practice, like local knowledge, community needs, right alongside academic knowledge.
So it embraces complexity.
Absolutely. Traditional disciplinary science often tries to simplify things, assume you can isolate variables, find a stable equilibrium. Transdisciplinarity starts by acknowledging that real-world problems are complex, messy, non-linear. It doesn't aim for one simple, fixed solution, but rather managing dynamic systems that are constantly changing, looking for multiple possible states, adaptive solutions.
And this connects to that idea of responsible innovation instead of just knowledge transfer.
Yes, directly. Innovation isn't just about having a research finding. It's about the application, the valorization of that knowledge to actually solve a problem, create a useful product, or deliver a needed service. It's about generating tangible value within society.
So the goal isn't just better research papers, it's building a whole system.
Precisely. The ultimate aim structurally is to build a functional national system of innovation, NSI, one that's specifically tailored to the unique context, resources, and challenges of each individual country. It's about creating pipelines so that all kinds of knowledge, academic, indigenous, practical, can flow, combine, and become applied assets within that nation, contributing directly to its development, not just adding lines to a CV sent overseas.
That makes sense. But if the whole system pivots towards local relevance and societal impact, is there a risk? Do universities risk losing international standing or, scientific rigor by moving away from those global publishing benchmarks?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a valid concern. The paper tackles this head-on by arguing the new system needs to be inclusive of societal relevance, not exclusive of scientific quality. The proposed solution isn't to ignore rigor, but to redefine how it's assessed and rewarded. The key is completely overhauling that RAE, the research assessment exercise, replacing it with an inclusive weighting system.
A new set of metrics.
Exactly. A system that explicitly rewards societal relevance and deep collaboration alongside traditional scientific merit. They propose focusing on 3 core areas for evaluation. First, relevance to policy. How much does the research actually inform or influence policy? This could be measured by things like specific policy impact indicators, how many policy briefings are produced, maybe even a public sector citation index.
Okay, practical impact on governance. What's the second?
Second area is all about working together, collaborative activities, and innovation. This would directly measure things like joint research projects, co-authored patents, co-publications involving partners outside academia, perhaps even analyzing citations within the private sector. This immediately undermines the incentive for lone wolf, siloed research. Your advancement would literally depend on collaboration.
And the third area. This sounds like the most radical departure.
It is quite radical. Societal relevance. How do you measure this? The proposal includes using things like societal panel reports and detailed stakeholder analyses, essentially giving the communities and stakeholders who are meant to benefit from the research a formal voice in evaluating its relevance and impact.
That's a major shift, having community panels evaluate university research. But you mentioned this isn't totally unheard of elsewhere.
No, it's not entirely blue sky thinking. Some developed nations are already experimenting with similar ideas, recognizing the limitations of purely academic metrics. The example given is the Netherlands, with their NWO Responsible Innovation Program. Apparently, research proposals there already need evaluation by both a traditional scientific panel and a separate society panel. Both scientific quality and societal relevance must be demonstrated.
So there's a precedent for trying to balance these two crucial aspects.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the evidence actually supports this collaborative, networked approach. Studies show that research cooperation tends to correlate with better innovative performance. It also leads to what economists call behavioral additionalities, things like researchers developing new skills, building wider networks, becoming more adaptable benefits that spill over beyond the specific project.
like the clusters around Stanford or MIT.
Exactly those kinds of dynamic clusters, yes, or similar effects seen within EU research collaborations. The argument is that this positive dynamic, this productive exchange, can absolutely be fostered in African contexts by redesigning the incentives to encourage it.
So what does this all mean when you pull it all together?
Well, the core conclusion seems pretty stark and unavoidable. This kind of fundamental re-engineering, this socialization of African knowledge systems. It's presented not just as a good idea, but as a necessary condition, necessary both for achieving genuine sustainable development across the continent and, interestingly, for the long-term survival and relevance of the higher education institutions themselves.
So making science relevant isn't just about helping society, it's about ensuring universities have a future.
That's the argument. By making African science demonstrably relevant to local needs, by producing tangible solutions and responsible innovations that people value, the funding dynamic could flip. Instead of universities constantly begging for scarce resources, private sector partners and government bodies might increasingly demand engagement, seeing universities as essential partners. Funding could become more of a demand-led process, an investment made in expectation of valuable returns.
It's a compelling vision. And it really resonates with broader global discussions, doesn't it? This idea of socializing science, making it serve society more directly.
Absolutely. It's not just an African issue. We see everywhere that huge global challenges, climate change is the obvious one, but also poverty, financial instability, pandemics, they simply cannot be tackled by isolated disciplines or sectors.
You need partnerships.
You need effective partnerships across all the different scientific disciplines, yes, but also across what's sometimes called the quadruple helix.
The quadruple helix.
Yeah, it's that idea that real impactful innovation requires constant interaction and collaboration between four key players: government or governance structures, academia itself, the private sector, and crucially, civil society. All four need to be involved.
It really drives home the need for breaking down barriers, not just within universities, but between universities and the wider world. So, a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over this week, building on everything we've discussed. Considering this massive proposed re-engineering focusing on pedagogy or mindset shifts or governance reforms, which single aspect do you think, if tackled first or most effectively, would yield the fastest, most significant return for sustainable development? Not just in Africa, but perhaps in any context facing similar challenges.
Yeah.
Something to ponder. Thank you for tuning in for the deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.
Till next Thursday. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Join us every Thursday for more insightful conversations. We would love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts, suggestions, and comments with us throughout our social media platforms or via email.